In today's video, we're diving into one of the most consequential transformations in American history: how the mobilization for World War II not only secured victory overseas, but also pulled the United States out of the Great Depression once and for all. This was a time when federal power expanded in unprecedented ways. Industry skyrocketed, and Americans from all walks of life, men and women, white and non white, contributed to the war effort. From factories and propaganda to internment camps and civil rights activism, this is the story of how total war reshaped the nation. Let's get started. To defeat the Axis powers, the United States needed to do more than just send troops into battle. It had to mobilize the full force of its people, its industries, and its government. This meant a massive expansion of federal authority, one far beyond anything Americans had seen during World War I or even the New Deal. Right from the start of 1942, the government created special agencies to steer the country's economy toward wartime production. First came the War Production Board, or WPB. Its job: overhaul America's peacetime industry. Out went civilian goods like trains, and in came tanks, ships, aircraft, and ammunition. Later that year, the Office of War Mobilization, or OWM, was formed. It set production priorities and controlled access to raw materials. One key tool the government used was the cost plus system. Contractors were paid their production costs plus a guaranteed profit. This incentivized efficiency and speed. Meanwhile, the Office of Price Administration, the OPA, inserted itself into daily civilian life. It froze wages, prices, and rents, and it rationed essentials like meat, sugar, gasoline, and tires. Its main goal was to prevent wartime inflation, but it also came to symbolize the war's reach into every American home. Between 1939 and 1945, federal spending exploded, rising by 1,000%. The gross national product surged from $91 billion in 1939 to $166 billion by 1945, growing more than 15% per year. But the war wasn't free. By the end of the war, the national debt had ballooned to $250 billion, 5 times what it had been just 4 years earlier. For a decade, the Great Depression had gripped the country. But with war came jobs. With government contracts came money. And with demand came growth. Wartime production supercharged the economy. By 1944, unemployment had virtually disappeared. American industry didn't just keep up with demand, it outproduced the Axis powers combined by a factor of two. Factories that once churned out cars now rolled out tanks and planes. Over the course of the war, American workers built more than 300,000 aircraft, 100,000 tanks, and ships totaling 53 million tons in capacity. The war effort didn't just solve unemployment, it smashed the Depression into history. Public support for the war was high, but the government still worked to maintain morale and shape public attitudes. Through posters, songs, bulletins, and film reels, propaganda encouraged Americans to conserve resources, buy war bonds, and produce more. The Office of War Information carefully managed the release of news about troop movements and battles, ensuring that the American public remained optimistic. Movies, radio programs, and pop music all promoted a cheerful, patriotic narrative. Yes, war was hard, but it was just, necessary, and winnable. With millions of men serving overseas, factories needed new hands, and American women once again answered the call. Over 5 million women took wartime factory jobs, many for the first time. The number of married women in the workforce climbed to 24%. One song in particular captured this shift: Rosie the Riveter. Rosie became a national icon, a symbol of female strength and patriotism. Despite their essential labor, women were paid less than men, and while many returned to domestic life after the war, thousands remained in the workforce. This moment marked the beginning of a long term shift in women's employment across the 20th century. World War II also reshaped Black Americans' lives, both in opportunity and in struggle. The Great Migration of African Americans from the South to northern cities continued as war industries created new job openings. But discrimination persisted. In 1943, race riots erupted in cities like Detroit and New York City. Civil rights leaders promoted the Double V campaign: victory against fascism abroad and victory against racism at home. Membership in the NAACP surged, and in 1942, a new group, the Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, was founded to push more aggressively for racial justice. When black leaders threatened a march on Washington, President Roosevelt responded with an executive order banning discrimination in government jobs and businesses with federal contracts. In a significant legal victory, the Supreme Court ruled in Smith v. Allwright of 1944 that it was unconstitutional to exclude African Americans from political party primaries, a ruling that laid groundwork for post war civil rights battles. America's diversity was on full display during the war. About 25,000 Native Americans served in the military. Thousands more worked in defense industries. But their most famous contribution came through language. The Navajo code talkers, along with the Comanche and others, used their tribal languages to create unbreakable communication codes. These codes were critical, especially in the Pacific Theater, and the Japanese never cracked them. Meanwhile, Mexican Americans served both on the battlefield and in the fields. Over 300,000 served in the military, and many others worked in war industries. A 1942 labor agreement allowed Mexican braceros to enter the United States seasonally to help with agriculture, bypassing formal immigration procedures. But racial tension also rose. In Los Angeles in 1943, white hostility toward young Mexican Americans wearing flashy zoot suits sparked violent street clashes known as the Zoot Suit Riots. But no group suffered more during the war than Japanese Americans. After Pearl Harbor, suspicions fueled by racism and paranoia exploded. Despite the fact that most Japanese Americans were U.S. citizens, they were suddenly seen as potential threats, spies, or even traitors. In 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, forcing over 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast into internment camps. Families were given days, or even hours, to leave their homes. They were relocated to military style barracks, surrounded by barbed wire and patrolled by guards. Even as nearly 20,000 Japanese Americans served loyally in the United States military, the government continued this policy. In Korematsu v. the United States of 1944, the Supreme Court upheld the internment as a wartime necessity. It wasn't until 1988 that the United States government formally apologized and offered compensation to surviving internees, acknowledging the deep injustice that had been done. World War II redefined the United States militarily, economically, and socially. The Great Depression came to an end, replaced by a booming wartime economy. Government agencies took control of industry and civilian life. Women entered the workforce like never before. Minority groups served, sacrificed, and protested, laying the groundwork for the civil rights battles that would come in the post war era. But the war also revealed the nation's contradictions. As the country fought fascism overseas, it interned its own citizens, tolerated racial violence, and withheld equal pay from women. Still, World War II set the stage for the new American century, and in doing so, it forever transformed the nation's role in the world and the role of its people at home. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.